Thank you, Mr. President. As our nation celebrated on July 4th, our birthday, with festive block parties, in one example in Baltimore, it turned to a tragic gun violence in our own backyards and across the country. It's been a deadly summer so far, and we've only made it to the middle of July. In my home state of Maryland, in Salisbury, a 14-year-old Xavier Cardin Maddox was killed and 6 others injured during an overnight July 4th block party. It came just after a horrific mass shooting on July 1st at an annual block party for the South Baltimore Brooklyn neighborhood, which claimed the lives of a young man and a young woman while injuring 28 others, many of whom are teenagers. 20-year-old Kailas Fagmimi died at an area hospital, and an 18-year-old Aaliyah Gonzalez was pronounced dead at the scene. Just weeks before the shooting, Gonzalez graduated from Glen Burnie High School in Anne Arundel County. Gonzalez had recently decided to enroll at Anne Arundel Community College to stay closer to her family, according to news reports. Now she is dead. I joined Governor Wes Moore and Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott in a visit to the Brooklyn neighborhood on Independence Day. As I said at that time, this is a dark moment for our community and our country. People who shouldn't have guns, and they're causing irreversible harm. Public safety, as always, must be our top priority. Sympathy and words are not enough. A comprehensive approach to reducing violence includes cracking down on illegal guns, many of which flow from other states into Maryland. We must also enact stricter regulations on legal gun purchases. Mayor Scott of Baltimore summarized the need for action, and I quote him, "You're talking about a country where it's easier for a 14-year-old kid to order pieces together, to put a gun together, and go out and use it and commit a crime than it is for me to get a Claritin D from CVS. That's what we should be talking about every day in this country." Maryland has been working on this. The General Assembly, with Governor Moore's signature, recently enacted legislation in Annapolis to strengthen gun safety rules regarding carrying of concealed weapons, restrict the carrying of firearms in sensitive locations such as schools and healthcare facilities, strengthening safe storage requirements for firearms, and raise the age from 18 to 21 to qualify for a handgun permit. Following the Brooklyn shooting, Mayor Scott stood up a coordinated neighborhood stabilization response within the community under the auspices of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. This response focused on addressing trauma and stabilizing the neighborhood in partnership with community-based organizations and city agencies. Our federal partners also have been working to make Baltimore safer, with a focus on reducing violent crime and the homicide rate, particularly gun crimes. U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland, Eric Barron, recently noted that the overall homicide and non-fatal shootings in Baltimore are continuing to trend down significantly. While this is little consolation to the victims of the recent shootings and their families, as of the half-year mark in 2023, homicides were down over 22%, and non-fatal shootings were down over 12%. In Congress, our Maryland delegation has worked to increase resources and investments to improve public safety in Baltimore and throughout our state. This has included direct resources to local governments, community organizations, colleges, universities, and others. I've introduced bipartisan legislation to end secular violence and protect crime victims, and have sponsored legislation to boost federal assistance for state and local witness protection programs. And I continue to urge the U.S. Justice Department to provide additional resources to combat violent crime in Baltimore and throughout the state of Maryland. It is important to understand that the horrific and seemingly endless instances of gun violence are not limited to our state. Sadly, over the July 4th holiday, there were at least 538 shootings in which 199 people were shot and killed, and 520 were shot and wounded across a total of 43 states and the District of Columbia. Mr. President, this is a national problem that must be addressed at the federal level in conjunction with state and local measures. President Biden is correct that we have the power to make a change and end the cycle of violence caused by guns in our society. He recently stated that as we have seen over the last few days, much more must be done across America to address the epidemic of gun violence that is tearing our communities apart. When I heard that half the victims in the Brooklyn shooting were under 18 years old, it brought back memories of last summer where the mass shooters in Uvalde, Texas killed 19 children and 2 teachers. Following that tragedy, Congress formed a bipartisan working group and within a month of the shooting passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. President Biden signed this legislation into law, which finally broke the decade-long gridlock on gun safety legislation. It is already making a difference with increased funding for community violence intervention and prevention initiatives, including some underway in Baltimore. The new law strengthens protections for victims of domestic violence by adding convicted domestic violence abusers to background checks. It creates a new source of funding for states to implement red flag laws, which help to keep weapons out of the hands of dangerous individuals who should not have access to a firearm. It cracks down on criminals who try to evade licensing requirements and makes clear which gun sellers need to register, conduct background checks, and keep appropriate records. It also strengthens the background check process for those under 21 years of age seeking to buy firearms by ensuring that officials have access to juvenile and mental health records. Importantly, in July 2022, shortly after the passing of this historic gun safety legislation, the Senate, I'll acknowledge, unfortunately, was on a party line vote, finally confirmed Stephen Dettelbach to be the director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF. The ATF had not had a permanent Senate-confirmed director since 2015, due in part to the lobbying of the National Rifle Association to keep this position vacant. The ATF now has a permanent leader in place who can carry out its critical mission to stem the illegal use and trafficking of firearms, among other important priorities. Mr. President, there is no single solution to this deadly problem. We've got to attack this from all directions until our children and our neighborhoods stop being shot. In addition to battling the scourge of illegal weapons and the changing mindsets of our community level, there has to be we've got to end the knee-jerk reaction to every disagreement trying to be settled by the use of handguns. It's time, way past time, for Congress to pass common sense additional legislation, such as renewing the assault weapon ban, requiring background checks for all gun sales, including unlicensed sellers, eliminating the Charleston loophole that allows for a sale to go forward if a check is not completed within 3 days, banning the importation, sale, manufacture, transfer, and possession of magazines that hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition, raising the minimum age for assault weapons purchases from 18 to 21, requiring self-storage of guns, and ending gun manufacturers' immunity from liability. These are just a few of additional examples that we could do right here in the United States Congress and make a difference. As a community and as a nation, we are not powerless to act. In fact, we have a responsibility to do something meaningful to save lives. Most Americans support common sense gun safety action. Saving lives is the right thing to do, and it should never be partisan. Gun violence affects both urban and rural communities, and daily gun violence affects both large and small communities, even when it doesn't make the headlines. I urge my colleagues to take action now and not wait for another mass shooting to break this ongoing cycle of violence in so many of our neighborhoods and communities.